A young couple moves to a remote rural area where they accidentally fall into a cave with an underground water source. Soon after, they begin to notice their bodies undergoing strange transformations. The film opens deep in the forest, where a group of rescuers is searching for two missing hikers. None of them notice the gaping hole in the ground that leads to a cave below, hiding a church bell and an underground spring. Two search dogs somehow make their way down into the cave and drink from the spring. Later, the dogs are seen standing in the forest, facing each other silently, until their handler takes them back to their kennel. That night, the animals' bizarre behavior escalates. The dogs make unsettling noises, and when a rescuer goes to investigate, he discovers that the two creatures have fused together. The story then shifts to Tim, a musician packing up his things for the move. His girlfriend Millie has landed a job as a school teacher in a rural backwater, and to be with her, Tim has to put his music career on hold. Though he promises his bandmates that he'll come back for rehearsals, especially with a tour coming up. At their farewell party, while Tim is giving a speech, Millie jokingly proposes to him in front of everyone. But when Tim freezes and fails to give a clear yes, the joke suddenly falls flat, leaving an awkward silence. Despite the incident, the couple doesn't really fight about it, though that night Tim has a nightmare of his crying mother and his father's corpse lying in the opposite bed. Soon after, they move into a charming house somewhere deep in the middle of nowhere. While unpacking, Tim catches a foul, rotten smell. Following the stench, he removes one of the gilded lamps to check behind the boards and discovers a dead rat king. Meanwhile, at work, Millie meets her colleague Jamie in the teacher's lounge, where they chat over coffee. In the evening, exhausted after her first day at work, Millie calls Tim to bed, but he prefers to stay up late. He still needs to learn a guitar part for the band's rehearsal on Thursday. The next day, the couple sets off on a hike through the surrounding forest to better familiarize themselves with their new home. When it starts to rain, Tim suddenly falls into a hole in the ground, the very same one with the bell, which he manages to grab onto for a moment. Millie tries to pull him up, but physics can't be cheated. She slips and they both tumble down into the cave. Realizing that, with the rain making everything slick, there's no way out until it stops, they decide to explore. The cave is cluttered with random junk, as if part of a building collapsed into it or the locals have been dumping trash there. Tim suggests making a fire from a fallen tree to keep warm, though Millie initially mocks the idea. They also discover they don't have much water left. Tim hands the remaining bottle to Millie, then refills an empty wine bottle with water from a spring at the far end of the cave and drinks from it. To pass the time until morning, Tim tells Millie about dead rats. He recalls how, as a child, his father once told him his room stank. Even though Tim couldn't smell anything, the source turned out to be a dead rat inside the wall. Living next to it, little Tim had simply gotten used to the stench. Then he remembers how his father died. When he returned home one day, the air was heavy with the smell of decay. His mother, driven mad by grief, had left the corpse in bed, pretending nothing had changed, completely oblivious to the odor. Later that night, as they try to sleep in the cave, Tim suddenly wakes up and sees the cave walls breathing, expanding, and contracting like lungs. Millie, on the other hand, is suffocating, but it turns out to be just another nightmare. When she wakes up, the couple realizes in shock that their legs have somehow fused together, as if someone had glued them. With great effort, they manage to tear themselves apart and carefully climb up the cave wall to get out. Back home, after washing away the scent of adventure in the shower, Millie asks Tim to give her a massage, but something strange comes over him during the process. He gets carried away, causing her real pain. Upset, she decides to drive into town, telling Tim to take a shower as well. Once she leaves, Tim steps into the shower, and suddenly he's overwhelmed by a strange force again. His body starts jerking violently, slamming against the walls of the shower stall as if in sync with Millie's movements elsewhere. Then, as though pulled by some invisible tether, he suddenly smashes his head against the tiles in the direction she drove off, cracking the ceramic and cutting his forehead. Shaken, Tim goes to see a doctor. The physician attributes his condition to prolonged stress brought on by his parents' deaths and the recent move to a new place. He prescribes a muscle relaxant and casually mentions that a couple of tourists recently disappeared in the area near their home. The entire town had been searching for them. Back at home, Tim starts Googling information about the missing couple. He finds the social media profile of the missing woman, trying to understand what drew them to this remote region. Millie catches him in the act, but before he can explain about the disappearances, the doorbell rings. It's Jamie, Millie's colleague who lives nearby, stopping by to check on his new neighbors. Over drinks, Tim mentions that he and Millie found strange traces of some kind of cult in the cave in the forest. Jamie explains that there used to be a New Age church there, but one day it collapsed underground. The furniture they saw in the cave must have belonged to it. The conversation shifts to how the newcomers are settling in, and Tim carelessly admits that he sometimes feels like a prisoner in this place. Millie says nothing at first, but after Jamie leaves, she pointedly reminds Tim of his words. Tim tries to explain to Millie that ever since the cave, something strange has been happening to him, but she doesn't take his words seriously. That night, Millie wakes up to find Tim lying next to her with his eyes wide open and mouth agape. unconsciously swallowing her hair in some kind of sleep-induced frenzy. Even after waking him, it takes both of them a lot of effort to pull the hair out of his throat, and they end up having to sacrifice several locks. In the morning, Tim finds another strand of Millie's hair stuck between his teeth, yet another disturbing oddity in an already growing list. Gathering his instruments, he prepares for a trip to band rehearsal in the city. Millie drives him to the train station, but as soon as she leaves, Tim begins to feel worse. An unbearable pull seems to drag him in her direction. He downs the muscle relaxants the doctor prescribed, but they don't help. Leaving his things behind, he stumbles back like he's in a fever dream. Meanwhile, at school, Millie notices a strange drawing by one of her students. Two dogs fused together at the heads like conjoined twins. Later, she spots Tim wandering into the schoolyard, looking dazed and unsteady, almost like he's under some strange spell. Alarmed, she quickly pulls him out of sight and drags him into a restroom. There, Tim suddenly leans in and kisses her, and emotions overwhelm them both. They lock themselves in a stall, drawn together by a force they can't resist, almost like an invisible magic is pulling them closer. But the nightmare doesn't end there. Afterward, they realize they can't separate. Some bizarre supernatural glue holds them together in the most uncomfortable way. To make matters worse, a small boy outside the restroom is impatiently waiting to use the toilet, confused about what his teacher is doing inside. Finally, Millie, frustrated and furious, blurts out that she hates Tim, and the strange magic shatters instantly, setting them free. Later, however, Millie has to explain herself to Jamie, who politely pretends everything is fine and avoids pressing her for details. Back home, after a heated argument with Tim over what happened, Millie heads to Jamie's house to apologize. He invites her in, offering her a glass of water and a heartfelt conversation. As they talk, Jamie opens up about his former partner, who's no longer with him, and advises Millie not to rush things with Tim, even if it feels like their old passion has faded and been buried under the weight of everyday routine. Jamie also talks about Aristophanes' theory of the obort. Once, people had 2 heads and 4 arms and legs, but Zeus, as punishment, split them in half, giving them the form we know today. Ever since, humans have wandered the world searching for their other half to reunite in a single union. On his way home, Millie meets Tim. They walk holding hands as a sign of reconciliation. At home, the boy reads a message from his bandmates but doesn't reply. Instead, he compares the coordinates of the last photo taken by the missing tourist with a map. It turns out the picture was taken not far from his house. The investigation is interrupted by a knock at the door. Millie is banging her head against it while levitating above the floor. When Tim opens it, she collapses onto him, and he wakes her with a slap. In the kitchen, sitting at the table, he tries to explain that something strange has been happening to them since the visit to the cave. But Millie is not ready to believe it so easily. He also notices that the blood dripping from her broken nose is running across the table toward him. To avoid further incidents, the pair decide to sleep in separate rooms. That night, Tim wakes up to find his body crawling against his will toward Millie's bedroom. He struggles to regain control of his limbs, trying to stop the movement. But as soon as he freezes, his girlfriend opens the door and, possessed by demons, crawls toward him. The moment their hands touch, their flesh begins to merge into one, blending together like clay. To stop this metamorphosis, Tim pulls a bottle of pills from the drawer, the ones they usually take together. The drug slows the connection, but an overdose causes loss of consciousness. The guy comes to only in the morning, tied to a chair in the kitchen. Millie is disappointed that she didn't manage to carry out her plan before he woke up. She wants to cut through the fused skin of their arms with a lopper, since the pills didn't fully reverse their merging. Realizing he has little choice, the guy agrees to endure it, dulling the pain with alcohol. After managing the separation, they have breakfast. When Tim notices that there are almost no pills left, meaning the next episode will have nothing to be curbed with, the pair decides to head into the city and go to the hospital. But Millie remembers she left the keys at Jamie's place. While she goes to fetch them, Tim secretly returns to the cave to investigate it and understand what's happening to them. Millie doesn't notice that near Jamie's door hangs an exact copy of the bell from the underground church. The owner doesn't answer, so she enters the house to get the keys. At the end of the hallway, a video playing on the TV catches her attention. A religious ritual in that very church Jamie spoke of. The cult members are marrying a same-sex couple, after which the pair is taken down to the basement where the spring lies. The viewing is interrupted by Jamie lurking behind her. He explains that thanks to the water from this spring, lovers can merge into a single being, just like the 2 doves on the recording, from whom Jamie himself was created. The host advises Millie not to resist the metamorphosis, since the alternative would be far worse. To drive his point home, Jamie cuts Millie's arm just like in the ritual. Striking him, Millie runs away. Meanwhile, in the cave, Tim is attacked by a monstrous creature made from the fused bodies of the very tourists who had gone missing. However, their transformation into a single whole was not completed because of the death of the other half. A knife is sticking out of the man's throat. Taking the weapon, Tim fights off the monster with it, a creature that shows not so much aggression as a plea for mercy for the killing, and makes his way out of the cave. Tim and Millie meet near the house, and once again they are drawn to each other against their will. The young man says that he knows how to stop the process, but for that they must stop resisting. They stand facing each other, after which Tim puts his hand behind his back, where the knife is hidden. However, he pretends that he is proposing to Millie. Then he asks the girl to close her eyes and pulls the knife from behind his back. He explains that the only way to prevent them merging is if one of the two dies. Tim wants to cut his own throat, but Millie tells him he doesn't have to. Her hand is already cut and she is bleeding. The girl collapses to the ground, losing consciousness from blood loss, spending her last moments in the arms of her beloved. When she passes out, Tim carries her body into the house. There, Millie suddenly comes to and realizes that he has pressed his hand to hers to stop the bleeding. In a surge of emotion, they decide to complete the transformation and become one, turning on Millie's favorite song. They undress completely and embrace. Flesh penetrates flesh, blending into a new, complete, and harmonious being. In an act of boundless love, it looks frightening, but the opposite is meant. A car drives up to the house, and Millie's parents get out. They have come to meet her fiancé. The elderly couple rings the bell, just like in the underground church, after which the doors open by an androgynous figure with the features of both Tim and Millie. This is where the film ends. Thank you all for watching, and see you soon.